This garden is in rough shape. The raised beds are rotting, the whole thing has a ditch running through the middle, and somewhere along the way I apparently decided that 2-foot walkways were enough for a human adult to function in. I was wrong. So I'm completely rebuilding this garden space into something really nice. New raised beds, wider walkways, new river rock, the whole deal. In the end, we'll have a garden that takes less work and gives us more food. Most of the tools and materials I'm using in this project are going to be linked below in case you need them. Now overall, I wanted this garden to function better long term. First, I'm expanding the walkways from 2-foot wide to 3-foot wide because the old pathways kind of felt like trying to maneuver a wheelbarrow into an airplane bathroom. Second, I wanted long-term raised beds this time. 15.5 feet long each so that it's easier to run drip irrigation through. I've also learned that reaching all the way across the 4-foot raised bed gets old, so instead of 4-foot raised beds, I went with a 3.5-foot design. Now the other major issue here is the grade. The middle of the garden dips down pretty significantly, so this time I wanted things to look level and intentional while still maintaining a gentle slope away from the house for drainage. Now for demolition. I pull apart the old raised beds and move them out of the garden area. The wood had served faithfully for many years and was ready to return to the earth from whence it came. Now that the old stuff is out of the way, it's finally time to start leveling. But here's where I work smarter instead of harder. Since the raised beds themselves are elevated structures, I don't actually need to level the entire garden space. I only need the walkways level. And then I can shim and level the raised beds individually afterwards, and that'll save me from moving approximately 1 billion extra pounds of dirt. I start near the sidewalk because I want the final river rock level to finish nearly flush with the existing concrete once the project is done. So I dig down about 3 inches below the sidewalk height and use that elevation as my reference point moving through the rest of the garden. Leveling the walkways is by far the biggest part of this project. A whole lot of digging, checking, leveling, tamping, checking again, realizing I made something worse, and then leveling again. Very standard landscaping behavior. To make things easier, I move excess dirt from the high spots into the low spots instead of hauling everything away. I use my round point shovel for breaking through and cutting out soil, then switch over to the flat transfer shovel to fine-tune the leveling work. And yes, I'm being extremely particular here. I'm constantly checking things with my 4-foot level because if you're gonna spend this much time building something, you might as well make it look intentional instead of kind of close from across the yard. And next comes the weed barrier. I use heavy woven 4-foot weed barrier throughout all the walkways, and I intentionally chose fabric wider than the walkway itself so I could overlap up underneath the raised beds. As you know, weeds love seams in your weed barrier. Any opening is prime real estate for a plant built to survive. Now for the raised beds themselves. I decided to use treated 2x10 lumber this time instead of 2x6s, partly because I've always wanted the beds to feel a little more raised in the raised bed department. And yes, I know some of you physically tensed up when I said treated lumber for the raised beds. But modern treated lumber is very different than the old treated lumber from decades ago. And if you'd like a full breakdown of the pros, cons, and safety considerations, I've got another video linked in the description where I go way deeper into that topic. I installed 3 raised beds that were exactly 15.5 feet long and 3.5 feet wide with 3-foot walkways between each. And before securing everything permanently, I spend a ridiculous amount of time squaring and aligning the beds so everything lines up cleanly with the sidewalk and pathways. Now, while I was building the beds, my buddy Brad and his sons showed up to help move river rock in the walkways. This rock actually came from a giant 15-ton gravel delivery I got last fall. I used the same rock for flower beds, for a French drain project, and now finally, the garden gets the last of it. And I love how river rock looks in the garden. And my wife loves having our driveway back again. Now, I did leave 3 of the existing raised beds alone because eventually I may replace that section with a greenhouse. And I didn't want to spend extra time and materials rebuilding something that may only be used for a year or 2. Instead, I simply cleaned up around those beds and installed weed barrier carefully along the edges to prevent weeds from popping up beside them later. Next, I got my 3 elevated raised beds into position. And after loading these beds with good soil, we top it with pine mulch and run our drip irrigation. There it is, garden transformation complete. If you'd like to see more details on any part of this garden build, I've got the full garden playlist you can find by clicking here. And if after seeing this video you feel like I've earned your subscription, you can do so by clicking the Man Cycle logo right here. See you next time.